Welcome to Dark Sorcery. I'm Alfredo Martinez, and I have with me once again the one and only Michael Hyson. Michael, good to have you back on.
It's good to be back on.
Oh, yeah,
It's been a
it's been a minute,
long time.
been a long time. And today we're going to be studying the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Let me see if I can just pull this up here. Anyway, yeah, so that's the version that I have right here. So I have E.A. Wallace Budge's translation here, and it's I like his scholarship. Um, he was I think he was a purchaser for the British Museum, and then eventually he became one of the well-known Egyptologists of the time. And yeah, so basically, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it's not really, I would say, a book. It's more like a compilation of a bunch of funerary texts. What would you say, Michael Heisen?
I actually agree with that because if you actually take a look at it, it's more about religious worship, prayers, spells, instructions, and dealing with the Egyptian pantheon of deities. So yeah,
Yeah, and it's had a lot of would you say it's had a lot of revisions over the years because um I think it was during the reign of Amenhotep III of the 18th dynasty, he instated monotheism into Egypt, and then Amenhotep IV continued it all the way up until King Tut. There's been so many revisions of the ancient Egyptian religion, the pantheons. It's gone through a lot of changes until we have what is now considered the Book of Dead. Would you agree with that?
yeah, I do actually. And especially when you introduce ritualistic things from, like, say, let's go with the Necronomicon or the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Because when you look at the burial aspects, the Egyptians believed in two aspects: the way you live and the way and what happens after you die. So when you get into the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's actually the soul's journey throughout life, whereas in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it is the journey after death.
Yeah. The thing about the Egyptian Book of the Dead is that these are spells for meant for the dead. You know, when they
Yep.
go into the afterlife to use to go through to pass the various tests, to go through the different trials they have to go through, to be seen as pure in the eyes of Osiris, and then to continue from there. Um, I think some people get it
Basically,
mixed up
it's
to
just
where they
basically
think,
the it's the Egyptian perspective of Homer's Odyssey, basically, or
yeah,
Dante's
it's
Inferno.
yeah, I guess you could say it's sort of a field manual for the afterlife, for their
Yeah.
afterlife. What it is, I mean, now some people, I guess, you could study it and kind of look at their mentality and maybe apply it to your practice. But then again, these spells, according to the Egyptians, are meant for the dead. But a lot of these funerary rites were meant for the priesthood in Egypt to be done during funerals. And not just anybody can just pick, like here in the West, anyone can just pick up a grimoire, have years of experience, and then perform these, perform rites, various rites, if they're a member of an order, work their way up, or if they
Hmm.
want to go ahead and start a coven, they could, set everything up like that. It wasn't like that in ancient Egypt in as far as the funerary rites. You had to actually be a priest. You had to actually, be somebody to do these rites.
Hmm.
What do you think about that?
I actually concur with that. When I first delved into necromancy on a full-time basis, one of the starting points that I got under was under the first, second, and third dynasty of ancient Egypt. And the order was known as the Shem priesthood. And there were different levels of responsibilities in this case, and one of which was to perform the rituals, such as the binding of the four organs that they thought was associated with the being that would, if they ever came back, they would need. Another one would be responsible for the cleansing of the body. Another one would be the mummification. But there was always one priest that was responsible for the incantations and the rituals itself. So you're right about that. It's not just about who can do it. It's a matter of the title and the rank and the capacity of enlightenment to be able to do that.
Yeah. And also, you mentioned necromancy. I want to speak a little bit about that because if you compare the two, when you compare the Egyptian Book of the Dead with necromancy, the practice of necromancy, there's a difference. See, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, these are spells to be recited for the dead, whereas with necromancy, you're contacting the dead, asking them questions, contacting the dead, contacting shades. This is actually for the dead to use themselves. So I would say that's the difference between the two.
Yeah. Even
one of the main
even if you look at it, even if you look at it from, say, a Middle Eastern perspective or a Greek, perspective of necromantic rites and rituals, from Egypt all the way up into, say, Greece, or let's go with, I don't know, let's go into Slavic for an example. You're looking at the Magoi, which is basically the OI at the end of the Magi, which is considered to be the Greek meaning of the wise one, wise man or a magician. A priest was considered to be a wise man, an elder of a religious sect, kind of like a priest or priestesses today. The magus is what we go by today, which is basically a priestly caste of ancient Persia. But it's also reciting to a man who is enlightened or seeks truth. And this is done through astrology, oneomancy, divination purposes and stuff like that, and through the use of calling on the deities.
Now, the fact that Moses himself came from Egypt, I'm sure he was taught this, these rites. I'm sure he came across these writings in his study, because he was taught by the priesthood in Egypt. Which, if you go through the Bible, let's speak a little bit about the Bible and the Book of the Dead. First of all, there's a section of the Book of the Dead where a lot of people think that Moses got the Ten Commandments from. There's a section that says, do not kill, do not steal, honor your mother and father. Goes down the list. Sounds very similar to, what the Ten Commandments supposedly received by Moses. And then there's also other verses also in the Book of the Dead. I want to read one right now. For instance, in section 2, chapter 16, it says, "I am yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I have the power to be born a second time." That sounds very Judeo-Christian. And anyone who has a biblical background can see that. So would you say that there is more than just the Ten Commandments in the Bible that mirrors portions of the Book of the Dead?
I do. For an example, if you go into let's go with the new revised edition. Go into the book of Matthew for an example, and I believe it's chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And it speaks of the three wise men. Okay, just out of an example.
Okay.
That followed astronomy to what is known as the Okian. This is Oikian is how it's spelled, and it actually resembles a house, not a stable. If you go into the King James or the New King James, then it recites the stable, which is a more modern day, perspective of it.
Right.
But if you go back into the old days, they used astrology to fortune tell, or to see the future, if you will, to predict where a birth would be, or say for an example, even if you go into, say, Revelations 1:7, where it says, I am the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end, that basically tells you, you know, you are there at the beginning, you're there at the end, which also
Yeah.
can be mediumship, if you will. And when you get into divination, for an example, you have what is called astral projection, but you've also got things like ghost walking, soul travel. You've got the ability to project yourself into various different realities, if you will, which indicates the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can go through the Bible and see different types of divination that they practice. For instance, there's a lot of times in the Bible when, let's say, some holy, whether it be the disciples or somebody else, this is, oh, they casted lots.
Yep.
There's that, and then there's
Book of
also,
Leviticus.
yeah, there you go, right there.
Something as the book
Going
of
to
the
see
law.
yeah. So there's a lot of examples of that. But anyways, back to the Book of the Dead.
Yeah.
There's another section another verse I want to read. This is section 2, chapter 15, where it says, "I live again and again after death, like Ra, day by day." Um, Again, you could say that's similar to, well, just how Christians would say carrying their own cross, that type of thing. Um, there's another one here
And also
from
with
section
the
two.
yoke is light.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
The yoke is light, basically, which means you're able to ascend.
Hmm. Yeah, and the thing is, when you take a look at whether it be from the Bible, the Book of the Dead, or just the occult in general, you have to look at it through the eyes of the occult, because when you look at whatever a verse through the eyes of the occult, whether it be the Book of the Dead or the Bible, there's multiple layers of interpretation, and anyone
Yep.
who is well studied in the occult will be able to pick up on that. Just, I'm sure, as I just read that, I'm sure lots of things just went through your head. Right there, you said
And pretty much, yeah.
ascension right there. There you go. There you go.
I am.
Also, um, let's see, section 2, chapter 16, it says, "Behold me, I am born, and I am come forth in the form of a living coup." Now, the coup is what they believed I think it was what they believed would actually go into the afterlife and face judgment and be able to go through all that.
The
So,
trials, the judgments, the
yeah.
fields of reeds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just some verses that I wanted to point out from the Book of the Dead. Are there any verses in the Book of the Dead that kind of stand out to you that you want to go ahead and mention? Maybe any sections?
No, not really, but there was one on page 61. I don't know if it's the same with your book, but
Yeah,
I haven't
yeah,
I haven't had this book in like 15 years, so
yeah.
I just got this one again. So,
Mine's going to be on
and
a
it's by
different
the
page.
same author. But yeah, it's page 61, the
All
fourth
right.
one, the fourth pylon, which is guarded by a cow-headed deity seated in a shrine. And it says, the words to be spoken when Ani cometh unto the fourth pylon, saith Osiris, this, and so forth. When you look at the word, it's basically, it doesn't matter if you're doing it in, say, for an example, spell casting, or you're utilizing prayers. Hell, even if you get into the Bible itself, let's go into, for an example, um, let's go into the book of Matthews, dealing with Lazarus rising, or the Chantorian's daughter, just for an example. You notice where Jesus, who was a practicing Magi, said two different things. On one, he's not dead, slumbers, right? Whereas the other is rise and, you know, do your thing, basically. So you're seeing how the
Mm.
word is power, kind of like the name of a deity. If you have the name, you hold power over it. And a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
old, scrolls in the old texts, it's always about the word. Even even if you go into First John for an example, I believe it's 3:1, if I'm not mistaken, where it says, "In the beginning was the word, was with God, and the word was God." You know, it's the
Was
same
God right?
thing. The word was there. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, if you're going to speak a spell or you're going to speak in a prayer or an incantation, you're commanding within a form of power.
Mm-hmm.
You're calling it forth. You're manifesting it. And I thought that
Yeah,
was
and
kind of cool.
and no doubt that the ancient Egyptians believed in the power of the spoken word,
Yeah,
which is why they compiled these texts. I mean, and which is also why these texts are, they're not just written down on papyri or something to write down. They're written on inside tombs, inside the coffins. So
yep,
there is no doubt that the dead will have access to these spells, and it's just basically a lot of it is just speaking things into existence, just
exactly.
constantly saying things. This is a spell. This is a spell. Which you could say. I mean, if you command someone to do something, uh, and you're an authority, they'll get up and do it. I mean, you could say that's
Yeah,
just speaking something into existence, but it's all. Then again, when you break it down, when you're a practicing magician and you've been a practicing magician and occultist for a long time, and you have a better understanding of how energy works, then you can not only know about it, you can just understand that whole process and how it actually works.
yep.
Right. So,
It's like understanding the
but
difference between an average ritual and then going into a ceremonial. Like for an example, the triangle of evocation versus a circle of empowerment.
mhm.
When you get into the rituals, you already know it's like muscle memory. So when you're getting in there and you're doing the prayers, you're getting into that, the tongue, you're speaking the mantra, the whisper, the prayer, whatever you want to call it. It's there.
Right, right, definitely. Now, let's compare a little bit of this funerary magic, Egyptian funerary magic, to let's say modern ceremonial magic. So, like, the purpose of these spells is to guide and protect the deceased in the afterlife, to make sure that there's safe passage past the guardians, preservation of the body, and moral justification before Osiris himself.
Yeah.
Um, Now, in ceremonial magic, the purpose is to transform the practitioner uh, in all ways, psychologically, spiritually, symbolically. Um, Going through invocation, evocation, self purification, attainment of higher states, and manifestation of will. So there's a comparison between the two as far as who performs the magic. This is performed by the as far as the Egyptian side of the priesthood with temple training, ritual purity rituals. Um, but as far as ceremonial magic goes, it's performed by individual practitioners, orders, small groups, people who have roles. This is the
Yep.
magus. This is the different officer positions. Things are symbolic, not tied to social class. But even though there are those differences, we can still learn from the Book of the Dead. We can still look at their mentality and apply it to our magical practice. Would you agree with that?
I do. For an example, I mean, you mentioned followers. You mentioned certain organizations. Look at the
Mm-hmm.
just out of an example. Look at the cult of or the priesthood of Anubis, for an example. You mentioned rituals and rites. You know, we see how, for an example, there's a couple of texts in Egyptian formats that show how Ra killed Osiris. Osiris is associated with iniquity, for an example, whereas Anubis is associated with the weight of your own guilt, so to speak, in the same way, but your actions in life and death, which will define where you go.
Hmm.
but they still deal with that whole scale thing. So it's like a ritual there. But if you look at, say, for an example, let's go to a little bit outside of that. Let's go into Greek mythology here and go into Homer's Odyssey just for an example. You have to gather the ingredients. You have to gather the components to be able to go into the underworld, for an example, to perform the rites. Now, as I said, Ra killed Osiris. Now, what did Isis do? She turned to Anubis and he taught her necromancy. She went
Hmm.
around, gathered all the components, all pieces of her partner, put him back
Hmm.
together, and resurrected him. Now that has to show that you have to have the items, the knowledge, and the understanding of necromantic rites and rituals to even bring somebody back to life from the dead.
Hmm.
And it's interesting to see how that associates with Homer's Odyssey because of the fact that for him to go home, he had to travel and traverse the plains just to be able to get what the the siren wanted.
Hmm.
Now, what was the purpose behind Ra taking out Osiris? Was it a bigger plan? Was it to get her associated with witchcraft in general?
Well, you can look at it. I guess it's up to the individual who looks. You can look at it from different ways. That's interesting that you bring that up
Yeah,
because there even when you look at Christian writings, when you look at things
yep,
biblical, people say, well, what did God intend? Did he intend for him to learn all that magic and then turn around and turn to him, or did he intend for this to happen? Did he intend for this person to be uh to be sent to hell, or did he intend for this person to learn this? There's so many different ways you can look at it. I
yeah,
guess it's just a matter of just kind of what comes to you. What does your
exactly.
intuition say? That's what it comes down to.
It comes down to servant, being a servant. It comes down to being a worshiper. It comes down to being, a believer in that system.
Well,
But
one of the verses. Go ahead.
uh, but what's more about that is even though you look at what a servant is, it is somebody that it's defined as somebody who pours drinks and serves food. But more than that, it's a servant of a being. It's a servant of some kind of entity. It's being a devotee. So when you look at it, let's look at it since we're talking biblical. What was, for an example, let's go with Jesus. Okay. He was a servant of God, right? But yet to some, he is God. But that comes down to the Trinitarian perspective, right?
Right.
So if you look at what I just put forth, for an example, about answering those questions and what you replied with, what was the purpose of all of it? It gets you thinking about what is it within the bigger picture of what you're trying to accomplish. Ra was considered to be a big cojones, if you will. Osiris really didn't have a good amount of role play in the Egyptian pantheon until
Mm.
Ra took out Osiris. She became associated with death magic and witchcraft to bring him back. So she's tied to the grave now, but she's tied to black magic, to
Mm.
sorcery. Now, if you look at the Egyptian Book of the Dead, her followers, or in this case, Anubis's followers, utilize the scriptures, the texts, the spell castings, the rituals to guide the spirits where they need to be, but also
Mm.
to bring them back.
Well, you could say that it's they believe in ascension and they believe in being
Mhm.
balanced. So that is why um, necromancy was turned to, which
Yep,
you have both sides in order to ascend. And I think that's what the ancient Egyptians realized. And that goes back to one of the verses from the book that I had read earlier when, talking about, ascending basically. Um,
exactly.
and I think that when you have that mindset of the fact that you need darkness and light in order to ascend, then everything will start to fall in place when you look at it from that mindset. Your intuition
Yep.
will come in, and then things will just fall into place.
It would be like, when you follow Osiris, for an example, he's the god of iniquity, like I said earlier. So basically, when you look at the scale that is used in today's court system, you got the gold versus the feather, right?
Right.
He's not judging you. You're judging yourself. Whereas with Anubis,
Right. It comes
it's
down to your
human
own
heart.
personal. Yeah.
Right. So it's the human heart versus the feather, which is basically your own actions being put against you to define if you're good or you're evil. So again, it comes down to the balance factor, which is something I liked about the Egyptian Book of the Dead, because as you said, it is a book about balance. And if you look at how they keep the harmony and the balance within the deities, it's a unique system in itself.
It is, and it goes deeper than just just regular funerary texts. When
Yep.
you look at it with multiple layers of understanding, you pick up on other things and kind of more of what they were trying to say.
Yep.
Um, Now, as far as comparing the book to necromancy again, um, these are a collection of spells meant to guide the deceased, focus on protection, so forth, rooted in Egyptian cosmology. Um, in necromancy, it refers to
Transformation.
divination through the dead. What's that?
Transformation as well.
Transformation. Yeah, there you go. Transformation is a big part of it.
Yep.
That's a very big part of it. But in necromancy, it's just this is divination through the dead,
Yep.
and summoning commanding spirits, contacts with ghosts or the dead for a certain knowledge or power. Um, in some cases, controlling the dead in in a coercive way. So I think that some people who I think that's one misconception about people when when they look at the title, that's automatically what they associate it with some people instead of just
Yeah,
diving deep
Hollywood
into it
produced
because
propaganda.
yeah, propaganda. And you know what?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the title a little bit because the Egyptians didn't call this book the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
Yeah.
It's better translated as going forth by the coming of day, or um, it can be translated as something more positive than just. I
Yeah.
think the Egyptian Book of the Dead is something that modern day they came up with. Said, oh well, we can market that and it'll sell more if we just call it that. So they just called it that. What do you think?
I think it's actually pretty much dead on right there. It comes down to selling product basically, or in this
Yeah.
case, a religious belief. But yeah, I mean, even if you get into, say, for example, Hollywood produced films, just out of an example, if you want to get into fiction and sci-fi stuff, it's something like this, or the Necronomicon is always a big gimmick for Hollywood, because it's in this day and age, it comes down to good versus evil. Good triumphs over evil, you know, and most films don't, today don't show the villain being the victor. So there's no balance there,
Mhm.
but it shows that good will
Yeah.
always be the victor.
Right.
So when
Right.
you get the Egyptian Book of the Dead, most people automatically go to like zombies and voodoo, or they're going into, say for an example, let's go with phylacteries for an example, getting relics and occult style hauntings, if you will, latching them onto like a property, or like say a dagger, a person or whatever. And it's all, that's what the way they see it. when in reality, it's an actual practice that's a study of the dead in the soul's journey.
Yeah, which is necessary
Yeah.
because, I mean, even if you look at the Bible itself, it's a very it's a very violent and can be disturbing book when you read everything
Mhm.
from cover to cover. In Sunday school, you just hear about, oh, there's Noah's Ark, Adam and Eve, multiplying fishes and loaves. You hear the same stories over and over. But when you
Yep.
actually get down to reading it from cover to cover, you say, man, there's some sadistic parts in this, man, that wouldn't even
Oh
be
yeah.
allowed in modern day theaters, you know. And, when you, but, back to the Book of the Dead is that basically the title is there for marketing purposes. When people see that, they think the title, they think, oh well, it's it's some kind of maybe something to do with necromancy, maybe something with the dark arts. Yes, to an extent, but ultimately it's to encourage us to be balanced, to ascend, and to move on, pretty
Right.
much in a
There's
nutshell.
different stages, basically.
Yeah, in
You
it,
know, there's a
yeah. So
reason why reason why so many religions have what is called the five pillars or the five pylons.
mhm,
It's the different elements that you can master. It's the
right.
descending, it's the descending and the ascending, aspects of, say for an example, the tree of life versus the tree of death or da'ath. You know, you have that balance where you can go up and down, but a lot of times you have to destroy to create. And if you look
Exactly.
at it like that, how do you transgress yourself? For an example, if you're looking at your own life and your soul's journey from the time you're born to the time you die, like in, say, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, not the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that's the soul's journey throughout life. Now, you look at it from a psychological perspective. Number one, you got the person that's sick and dying. Number two, you got the family and the toll on the family. Number three, you got the community and the effect that the person had on the community itself. Like, say, King David, Moses, about
Right.
Abraham, Jesus in himself, you
Mhm.
know? And then you have the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which takes place after, which shows that there's different planes, different existences, different,
Mhm.
dimensions, if you will, and the soul's
Yeah,
journey after death.
which is very true.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's basically the Egyptian Book of the Dead, as far as scratching the surface of actually what it is. And so we just thought we'd go ahead and speak on that. Anything else you want to bring up before we go ahead and finish up this video?
If you're going to get into the Egyptian Book of the Dead, I would highly recommend that you also get into the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Necronomicon, because if you want to understand rituals and you want to understand the soul's journey and what necromancy is from this perspective and understanding Egyptian practices, that is the best way that I would recommend to get into it. Not just getting into anthropology or thanatology, studying death and dying. There's a lot that you can do to do that. And I think these three books here are a prime example of where to begin.
I agree. I agree. Well said, Michael. It's been a great conversation. Anyone who wants to check out Michael's links, his social media links, I will have them in the video description below. And also make sure you check out our other channel called Light Sorcery, which has to do with healing, prosperous, light magic. Um, so that link will be below in the video description. Michael Hyson's also been on that channel as well. So he's had some good stuff to say. So anyone out there who's watching, make sure you like and subscribe to Dark Sorcery.